you all so much for coming out and for attending our session. We're so excited to be able to talk to you about digital video measurement and some of the big issues facing the publishing community today and advertising community. I wanted to first take some time to just thank the folks here. We could not have had this great programming without you. Let me introduce the panel. So we have Rob Elder, the CRO of Genius, right here to my right. Zach Schwitzky, the CEO and co-founder of Limbik, to his left. And then we have Ashish Patel, the Chief Insights Officer at Group 9. I asked these folks to send me a few thoughts about the digital publishing landscape, what they're facing, and some of the big changes that we're seeing. And I thought we could just start with a few big general questions. And Ashish, I'll put the first one to you. Really, what is the state of digital video right now? We see ad-supported, something we were talking about in the last panel. We see subscription video, we see mobile, we see over the top, we see short, we see long. How would you summarize it for the crowd?
So I guess in one word, the ecosystem is wild right now. There's never been more locations for consumers to find, discover, and directly consume video. Never been more platforms where people can find and discover and consume video than we have today. And it's a bit of an unruly mess to try to figure out distribution in this crazy ecosystem. So in Group 9, we're a holdings company. We have 4 brands that are, we like to call them distributed media companies. Now This, which is a news publisher, Thrillist, which is all about food, drink, and travel, the Dodo, which is kind of like the next gen Animal Planet, all focused on animals and animal rights, and then our 4th brand is called Seeker. But again, we consider ourselves distributed media companies, meaning that our goal is to take video to consumers where they're consuming. So as opposed to, although we do have healthy websites, our strategy really isn't about using social or other platforms to drive to our owned and operated. It's kind of meeting consumers where they are today and trying to feed that demand. But again, that said, we kind of cede a lot of control in the fact that a lot of our distribution and consumption is occurring on third-party platforms. So I'd say that, again, overall, the ecosystem is crazy right now just because there's so many places where we as publishers can put video, there's so many places where our consumers can find it. And in a lot of those cases, we're working on revenue share models in terms of advertising with the platforms. So it's a place where we're trying to right now figure out what is the best way for us to kind of understand and meet consumer demand. We know they're watching video and social, and yet build a healthy business behind it.
But Rob, one of the questions that I think we all have, and Ashish kind of touched on this, is that not every relationship with every platform is going to be the same. Your relationship with YouTube could be so different from your relationship with Facebook versus Snapchat. Talk to me about what's working for you guys over at Genius, who it is that you're actually trying to target there, and walk us through what you think is the future.
Wow, if I could have the answers to the future, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd be winning the lottery. For us at Genius, which started as a crowdsourced music database and is now, over the last 2 years, morphed into producing content. Our biggest partner in the distributed model that Ashish was talking about is YouTube right now for us. Our target is, the audience that we're communicating with is much younger. It's that Gen Z, the second half of the earlier part of the millennials, the younger millennials. And their consumption habits are far different than even, I would say, older millennials or Gen X or anyone else in the landscape. And so for us, what's working has been putting the content where our consumers are. And so that for us personally is YouTube and Instagram. Less so on Facebook. The second part of your question was how are we reaching that audience, or how am I communicating it? The big challenge for us, one of the learnings that we've had over the last year is identifying, recognizing, and then creating that content to match the platform. The habits, the way that the consumer acts or interacts with that platform is different for each one, and you have to, from from an editorial standpoint, from a creative standpoint, acknowledge that and make sure your content fits that mold, but stays true to the ethos of the message that your brand represents.
And Zach, as somebody who's kind of been at a video company from the start, as a co-founder, what are the things that you have to keep in mind when you're launching a company that's using different platforms? How do you broker some of those contracts? How do you even get in touch with such big platforms and start pitching your business?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's even more interesting now because a lot of the stuff that's going on from a privacy standpoint. And so we made a conscious decision early on that we don't actually create the content, therefore we have nothing to actually measure that belongs to us. But working with publishers or brands and getting access to their content, being able to track how people consume it, and doing that in a way that works for everybody, including the consumer. It was the path that we set forward, and then having a relationship with Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, going in there and helping them understand that our role in the world, as we see it, is to help content creators create content that resonates better, performs better with the consumer, which obviously if Group 9's creating content for Facebook and performs better, that's better for Facebook as well. So sort of saying, there's an opportunity for all of us to benefit here if we do actually work together.
Yeah, kind of just building on top of that, I think Group 9, an essential premise on our strategy is we really think of these social platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, Twitter, as the new cable pipes, as the new cable companies to a certain extent. And the behaviors that we're seeing with younger consumers are that they are watching a lot of video on these social platforms and they're spending more and more time month over month. So kind of the interesting point that we're at is like a lot of us digital publishers, us specifically with Now This and Dodo, really jumped on this social trend and bringing video to social early on. We built a lot of scale as a first mover with strategies like Rob was talking about by understanding the nuances of why someone's on Instagram versus a YouTube versus a Facebook and programming for that strategy. But really we're at a point where I think that the platforms are starting to think that they're cable companies as well. They're kind of creating locations for longer form content. Every major platform in the last year or 18 months has made some announcement that they want more shows and premium TV style content on the platform. So yeah, I think we're in an interesting point in the market where television, linear companies are actually pretty well positioned to play in digital because there's locations where you can purely syndicate TV style content. Yeah, it's a really interesting time, and we really consider, we think we're building kind of the new networks to live on these new cable pipes.
Yeah, but for cable companies that are producing this content, there's always been a way for you to measure what is viewed, how long it's viewed. Even if it's not the most perfect measurement, the industry has agreed on ratings. It doesn't really exist for digital. The way that YouTube counts a view can be different from Snapchat, from Facebook. Rob, how do you measure success in such a fragmented marketplace?
You're right. That is, I think that's one of the bigger challenges as an industry we need to solve for. I think brands are going to help drive that. I think if a brand like P&G or Ford or something along those lines doesn't buy what Facebook or Twitter or whoever sets their benchmarks, and they're able to make that point clear by the way they shift their dollars, I think that will bring some standardization to the marketplace. As for measuring success, I can't speak for these guys, but I do find it profoundly funny how many times what was my click rate in a campaign still gets brought up in conversations with ad agencies and clients. But for us, measuring successes, it really depends on the partner you're working with. There are some partners where it's, we want to create a piece of branded content. I want to make sure we reach X number of people. We're working with third-party companies to do, brand awareness or measurement studies on those campaigns. And then I think one of the ways that say YouTube is having success with their platform is holding themselves to a little bit of that higher standard with release standards, but it is not, there's not been a standardization of here's what a benchmark for success looks like against an ad campaign online. It really is a collaborative conversation with the partner we're working with, identifying what their ultimate KPI is, and then building the appropriate plan to reach that.
So, but let's say, and I'm going to toss this question to you, Zach. Let's say you're an advertiser. You're spending all this money on different platforms. You see a return on investment through a bottom line sale. And you determine, you know what, I'm going to create my own sense of an attribution. I know this probably worked on Facebook given their metrics. This probably worked on Twitter given theirs. But then you hear headlines that some of those platforms are lying about metrics. They're not being transparent about what really counted as a view. And maybe they'll tell you that 2 years later, oh, we overestimated your video views by 80%. How do you trust that in a world where we don't have fully accredited metrics aligned, how do you trust those partners?
That's a good question. I don't know that you can. I say that carefully for the reasons that you mentioned. I think one of the things that we see is trying to define success before starting a campaign gives you a chance to determine whether something was successful. And branded content I find so interesting because on one hand, publishers saying we want to drive as much attention as possible, and advertisers saying we want people to buy something. And sometimes those can be competing interests, and I think related, slightly off topic, but from a data standpoint, one of the things that we believe and think is so interesting right now is looking back at Netflix, and they had a run where when they switched from a company that was sending DVDs by mail to streaming service, they were licensing content from studios and networks, not creating any original content, and that allowed them to really understand how people consumed that content. And then using that data 4 or 5 years later to start creating original content, really get out ahead of the game. And so looking at the world today, and as Ashish mentioned, these companies like Facebook or YouTube wanting content from a company like Group 9, but then not disclosing all of the data that they have from a performance standpoint. And I think as we're starting to see a lot more companies entering the just original content environment and really giving themselves an advantage because they're tracking and understanding how people are consuming this content in a very different way than they're giving the actual content creators.
It's an interesting point though, they do have data and insights that they will give you if you will become a trusted content partner. We saw this with Facebook Watch, and Ashish, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, where they said to some content companies, you know what, that doesn't work really well, people don't watch it, maybe you should try this. As a content company, and I think particularly about now this, one of your 4 brands, what are some of the insights that you've learned from working with platforms about what actually works and what people actually like viewing in digital media?
So the primary insight, and quite frankly, this isn't one coming from consumption data. Most of what I do is look at what audiences do with our content and try to translate that into growth strategies for the people that distribute as well as the people that make it. But the main insight is that the platforms are self-serving. They're for-profit companies, and what they're going to do is whatever is effectively going to create more revenue for them. So that's one kind of viewpoint that we always have to hold, that what the platforms are going to tell you is serving their purposes. And what we found in a lot of cases is that generally doesn't, well, in some cases it aligns with our goals as a brand, in some cases it doesn't. So for us, it's really more about discipline and really trying to focus on the signals that we believe are proving that our content is performing or effectively resonating better with an audience. We generally look at things like how much time is being spent with our assets, how many people are sharing it, kind of as a stamp of approval. But yeah, the main trick is that the platforms are going to try to get you to do what they want. We need to understand that in some cases, well, it's really about threading a needle between what works on platform, what we want to stand for as a brand, and what our audience is demanding. It's a delicate balance, but it's about kind of threading the needle right through the middle of those concentric circles.
Yep.
Yep. And Rob, when you thread that needle, walk us through what it looks like. I mean, you're dealing with content that's reaching generations that I don't think are represented in this room sometimes.
There might be one behind the
There
camera.
might be one or two. So what's the type of stuff that we might not be watching all day, but it's resonating with that audience? Can you point to some trends?
So, for us, one of the key video series that we have is something called Verify, where we have an artist sit in a chair and talk about their hit song, and they'll break the song down lyric by lyric. And for a lot of the people in the room, we all remember buying CDs and albums, and you'd get the liner notes, and you'd open up that booklet, and listen to music for the first time, and you'd read along and get the message and the meaning of the song from the artist. That got lost in the digital generation. Our goal as companies is to try and bring that back. We're now doing that version from a video perspective. The learning for us has been we'll see immediate results on the styles of the artists that we put up. You can tell immediately, is it resonating with people watching it? How long are they watching for? To Ashish's point, a lot of those same metrics are important for us. One of the things that our branded content team talks about a lot is don't fall in love with the content series, because sometimes you have to be brutal and kill it if it's not resonating, even if it's a passion project for the producer. And so when you're producing content for the younger generation, it's really critical that you follow the lead at the same time. Our database allows us to that social database of ours allows us to identify artists that we're beginning to tick up. We then quickly get them in front of the camera and start to have them tell their story. And then it's a matter of monitoring that and seeing how are they growing, or are they stagnating, do we continue to work with them, do we move on to somebody else. It is and probably many of you have your own sample sizes in your own homes, and you can watch their own viewership. I was talking to somebody last night saying that when my daughter says she's going to watch TV and she's 14, if for her it's picking up an iPad and going to sit on the couch, right? It's never the remote control, and it's never the big screen I put on the wall. So it becomes it's a creative destruction process where we're creating a new series, we're putting things up, we're waiting to see if they resonate. If they don't, we're moving on to the next one and creating a new series that continues to build that audience and build the credibility. And then the last piece of that credibility is allowing the artist to be true to who they are, which can cause problems with advertisers because there's sometimes not nice language. But we've made the bet that we're going to bank on the fact that we can build a larger audience by allowing the artist to remain true to the message that they want to convey.
And they have to remain true to that message on a platform that feels native to them and that feels genuine.
Yeah, and so we've been fortunate enough that the artist community has embraced what we do. If you have ever been on our platform or have heard of somebody coming onto our platform, not only can the consumers, and I don't want to turn this into advertising, but the consumers are able to contribute, but artists also contribute against their own songs by providing context and meaning behind it. And so allowing that connective tissue between those two groups and really just being the conduit for that to happen has been our success. And while that's a microcosm and not everyone's example, I think the lesson there is making sure that the content, even if the artist are the ones producing our content, has that connectivity, and there is immediate feedback between your audience and the content creators.
You gotta take that feedback pretty seriously, right? If you're not listening to it, you would know exactly how to optimize for the future. Zach, one weird thing happened last week, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. Lifetime put out a show called You. Netflix picked it up and it went viral. When it was on Lifetime, it tanked. When Netflix took it, put it on its homepage, it went huge. And I think part of it is because Netflix sort of has really good data. It's listening to its users. It knows how to frame that show, how to market that show. Lifetime is a feel-good mom channel. It's not really meant and created for 12-year-old teens. And I think that's where Apple's thinking this is the mark. As somebody who works with distribution a lot, how can you take a piece of content and make sure it gets to the right platform, whether that's linear TV or digital video on Netflix or a Snapchat video?
So I think it's about understanding why people consume the content they consume. And one of my favorite examples is, if you looked at like a category level view of what people watch, say, this person or segment likes content about space, for example, so let's create more space and just get more of the same thing. But if you actually look at how the average person consumes content online, there's a lot of diversity. It might be a movie trailer, a sports highlight, a music video. And if you look at take a step down at the attribute level, say, what do these very different pieces of content have in common, you can start to see patterns. And so when you look at it that level from a distribution standpoint, predictably saying, what can we identify with this new show, therefore determine or look at who we should put in front of predictably who we think it's going to resonate with. And I think a lot of it too is, the people behind it. And we say, I used to say what we do at Limbik, we call content science, and our reference point was Moneyball for content. But we've updated that for anybody that's familiar with Astroball. It's a much better reference point. Because one, the Astros actually won, which the A's haven't done yet. And two, generally speaking, Moneyball said data or predictive analytics is better than human or the scouts. And Astroball really said, or the Houston Astros said, there's a lot of value in humans and human observation. If we can quantify it, we can use it predictively. And so really bringing these two different worlds together. And from a content standpoint, that's the message that we try to get out there, that predictive analytics can help inform decisions, but still it's the people behind it that need to make the decisions. And so in that new example, I think a lot of it is, Netflix may just have better people or a team behind it or capabilities, and was able to do more with something in addition to identifying the right audience to put in front of.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashish, I see you shaking your head, so I'd love to get your response. And I'd also love to throw another question out at you, which was that a few days ago, a bunch of media companies announced big layoffs. BuzzFeed is cutting 250 people, Verizon's cutting 800, Gannet's cutting dozens. You see this a lot with new age digital media companies that are backed by venture capital. Love to hear your response to the new example, but I'd also love to hear your response about what is going on with the digital publishing industry these days. Are we headed for another rough year? And what could publishers do to, kind of ensure a more solid future?
Yeah, totally. So going back to what Zach was talking about, and really about kind of how do you understand where to place your content for optimal performance or consumption, we think about it more as like consistently trying to drive content and audience match. So the first thing is trying to understand these platforms and why people are on Instagram versus Facebook versus YouTube. You visit these things for different purposes, you're looking for different types of stories, so it's lazy for us to take one asset and put it in all those places kind of unedited. So we really need to recontextualize things for the situations that they're in. From our perspective, we're really, I hate the idea of data-driven content. We like to think of it more as data conscious. It's really about understanding how far the data can take you and where human creative decisions need to be made. To a certain extent, that we're working with Zach on effectively trying to automate a lot of the recommendations that my team makes by looking at time series data from the platform, seeing when people are leaving and coming into a video, what they're doing, and working with Zach's company to create a computer vision layer to effectively tell us what's happening on screen when a user makes a decision. And we're trying to aggregate that to figure out how does behavior on Facebook differ than YouTube. Beyond that, like when we're making a basketball video, what are the elements that we should consider, et cetera. I think one of the benefits, even though the digital ecosystem is massively wild and there's a lot of locations and places that you can focus on, which can make you lose focus on certain successful things for your business, we are getting this feedback loop that's never existed before, and I think it's helping us enhance our creative. Now your second question around recent venture-backed companies and kind of the layoffs that are happening. I think, honestly, what's happening in the ecosystem is that the revenue the financial models aren't set yet. I don't think people have figured out what is the ideal way to operate in this digitally syndicated world where you're working with the platforms in a lot of cases on a rev share model. Effectively, the advertising model isn't set yet. So in a lot of cases, BuzzFeed, I think, is doing something around, well, at least like what they're saying to the press is it's around discipline, that they understand that the revenue models are not set, so they don't want to get out over their skis and are trying to pare back on the cost side, which is definitely something you can control. So the latter part of your question is kind of what are ways that you can set up for success, or maybe just less of a blow in a difficult market. One thing that we're doing on BuzzFeed as well is really thinking about diversification of our revenue strategies. That historically there's really been like two primary ways to monetize media, which is advertising or subscriptions. We definitely want to pursue exploring both of those options, but with digital, we think we have a lot more business lines that we can activate. E-commerce is something that's interesting for us. More affiliate marketing is something that's interesting for us. Licensing content is interesting for us. But really, it's about diversifying your revenue streams, not over-leveraging yourself on any given platform. Definitely not planning against deals you have with platforms because those can go away overnight. So yeah, I would say that companies that are disciplined and can control a good cost structure and diversify their revenue streams moving forward are the ones that will be successful.
I mean, it's not just digital publishing though, too. As you're saying some of these things, I'm thinking, wow, this is happening to local broadcasters, it's happening to local newspapers, heck, it's happening to local digital websites. It's hard for anyone to survive right now. Rob, what would you say would be the answer to if someone were to ask you, how do local specific publications handle this maybe different than a big national publication? And I ask you that because theirs are so similar to some of the stuff that you do where it's really built around community. National publications, I think, are really built around major stories and headlines, but they're not built to cater to a small niche community. And I think about Genius, and you're often communicating to a small rap community or a community that likes a particular type of music. So what does localized or niche content do to ensure that they can have a sustainable future? That might be different from like a big national syndicated publication.
It's an interesting question. For us, it's been, we're identifying, like you said, smaller niche music communities that we're creating content for and supporting. We benefit from the larger umbrella, right? Having the resources that create that hip-hop video are also the same resources that are creating that Latin music video or something along those lines. And so, efficiency through scale is a critical piece of that. Going to the point that Ashish made before about the diversification of your revenue streams, that has been, that for us is a big strategy. At Genius, we utilize the data on our platform to benefit our partners, but also the creative and the syndication side. And so I would imagine, or I would believe that that same model holds true, just on a smaller scale, right? In essence, you're catering to your community if you're a local newspaper or you are a national broadcaster. And catering and making sure that the content matches and meets up and resonates with your audience, regardless if it's 10,000 people or 10 million, is the mark of success for any of us. And so for finding that magic elixir that will help you solve that, the small scale, the local community is not an easy one, and I don't know if Genius has figured out the answer to that, but what's worked for us has been being able to internally utilize the same resources, externally making sure that we have direct communication with those communities to make sure that there's a flow of information back and forth, either through data or through direct communication that allows us to make sure that the content we're creating resonates. That's been our solution to date. Check back in a couple of years and let you know if this was successful.
Just to add to that, though, I think that specifically with local news providers, we at Now This, we do national news coverage, and it's often kind of picking up stories that local news journalists originally report on, and we blow them up to a much bigger audience. We know that this works because the stories are good, and there's a lot of value in the IP that these local news broadcasters and journalists are creating. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity around the stories and the storytelling from some of these local broadcasters. And there's a lot more locations to syndicate that type of stuff. I think there's a lot of documentary that you can do for a Netflix. There's been tons of examples of specifically newspapers doing podcasts to great success. KSL, local news broadcaster in Salt Lake City, has the Cold podcast, which is a top 10. So I think there's a lot of value in IP, and that there could be some interesting new revenue streams or potential around just good stories that no one else has.
Yeah, those brands, I think Ashish is right, those brands have built market credibility and brand recognition going back, if it's a newspaper, we talk about 100 years, that they've been able to sort of establish themselves as a trusted voice. Television the same, and so you need to leverage that credibility that you have with the audience, and then to Ashish's point, find other ways to generate revenue.
Yep, and there are definitely ways to do it. The New York Times is making millions and millions of dollars on their podcast daily. I think we have just a minute left, so I'm going to pose the final question to all of you, starting with Zach. You are all chief executives at media companies. It's a pretty big feat. But one of the tough things is that when you're hiring people, there's so much trouble in the industry. People might look up at you and say, man, will I ever get there without getting laid off or fired or having to worry about my financial stability? What would you say new hires need to consider in order to survive in such a tumultuous market? And what would you say to keep them optimistic? Zach, you start.
I think it's a great time to be in business right now. Embrace the unknowns. And for me, I think, there's a tremendous amount of value in the experience that somebody has, but it's really the open-mindedness and the willingness to, embrace those unknowns that's key for us.
Ashish?
I would say that it's kind of, I also work with a venture capital fund as an advisor. I would kind of give this similar advice to an entrepreneur as a younger entering employee into the market, which is there's a lot of opportunity right now. A lot of people can find this scary, but it's really about kind of finding those relative points of strength. So I think it's about kind of having confidence in your moves and being able to constantly pivot because the sands are shifting. So it's really about very quickly identifying where opportunity is and getting there fast.
Rob?
Listening, it made me think of that book, Something New by Cheese. I think still holds true, if not more so today than ever. I think one of the added benefits is, or pieces that wasn't discussed is, when you're hiring, if you're a young kid coming into the marketplace, you're just filled with natural enthusiasm about what lies ahead. At Genius, I'm the oldest employee by about 7 years, and so everyone I work with is significantly younger than I am. And so they're all, the change that we're all feeling, those of us who have gone through that transition, this is the world that they've always experienced, and so they don't have a reference point for something else. So it's not as fearful, scary. None of them have the mindset, like my father, who worked for IBM for 32 years, that world doesn't exist for these generations. It's not something they're even looking for. So I think they've been conditioned to embrace that change. It's us who have to do a better job embracing the unknown.
Totally, and it's so inspiring just to hear the three of you talking about the realities of the business, especially going back to the beginning of the conversation. You can't necessarily trust everything coming from your platform partners, but you have to try. It's the reality. Going back to some of the things we were talking about building community, you really need to take feedback and data and act on it. And then I think last thing, Rob, even what you were just saying, that the younger generation is really optimistic about this industry. Zach, as you mentioned, they're embracing change. It gives us all a little bit of hope as we wander into 2019 and start to embrace some unknowns. So I want to say thank you again to our entire panel. Thank you again so much for hosting us at Matrix, and we hope to see you again next year.